Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to the Prime Use series of interviews with top business and technology experts. I'm Dana Kohut, and in this interview episode, I'm delighted to talk with Yotam Yemini, who is CEO of Causely, an innovative startup company that leverages causal reasoning to help engineering teams better understand their system without drowning in endless alerts and dashboards. We will talk also about the latest news, which is exactly Causely and Grafana integration, and see what is the value for the engineering teams and the better that actually helps them better understand their system and the health of the system, and also about some of the Causely's core values as a company. Yotam will share with us his thoughts and prediction about the future of observability market. If any of this sounds interesting to you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the Prime U YouTube channel. Let's start. So before we talk about Causely, I'd like to learn more about you, Yotam, your career path. I know that you have this a bit unusual career trajectory where you started as a basketball coach, later worked for some of the largest tech enterprises, and now you're CEO of Causely, an innovative startup in the field of observability. So what was it? What were the specific steps that led you to your current position at Causely?
Yeah, so it's been kind of a full circle career moment for me. Like you said, I used to coach college basketball. That was my first career. And when I decided to transition into a new career in the tech world, the first company that I worked at was a company called VM Turbo. And that was back in 2010. And I joined, the founder at the time was Shmuel Klieger, and he was the CEO of the company at the time. And I was working for him as the 10th employee of the company. And Shmuel was the founder of Causely as well. And so I left VM Turbo actually prior to its acquisition by IBM, which happened in 2021. But Shmuel and I have stayed in touch over the years, and he started Causely just in the last couple of years, and we had this sort of right place, right time opportunity to get back together and join the team. And a number of the Causely team that started this company is building the product are a lot of the people that I worked with day to day at VM Turbo, and so that's a little bit of the serendipity of what brought us all back together.
Interesting. So would you say that your connection to Shmuel was the primary reason for you to join Causely? Or maybe there was something that actually sparked your interest, maybe an aha moment that you understood, hey, the industry is really lacking some of the solutions that you might be able to provide.
So there's a couple things. I mean, I think first is yeah, I've never been an engineer. I've worked with engineers my whole career, but I've always been jealous in some weird way of people that can code and build and just sort of have this magic to sort of see a thing and then build it. And so that's always been a superpower that I've been a bit envious of, and I've always really enjoyed working on the go-to-market side, helping engineers bring their ideas to life and bring them into the market. And then I think if I look back to my experience at VM Turbo with Shmuel, for about 7 years at VM Turbo, we were working and serving infrastructure leaders. And we would always at the time meet with CIOs and directors of infrastructure and talk about these, at the time, what felt like to me, because remember, I was coming out of basketball, these mythical application owners that the infrastructure team was always describing as their internal customer. And so when I left VM Turbo, I went to a company called Quantum Metric. And when I was at Quantum Metric, I had the opportunity to serve a different audience, which was the line of business leaders and the application owners that were building e-commerce websites and mobile apps for some of the biggest brands in the world, from eBay to United Airlines to the Gap and so many more types of brands like that. And I think for me, those two career experiences, sort of starting when I transitioned from basketball into tech, working at a company like VM Turbo, where we were meeting with CIOs and heads of infrastructure for massive banks and massive telcos and healthcare companies, and helping them adopt the cloud from an infrastructure perspective. And then marrying that with that second career opportunity of working at Quantometric, where we were now working with the chief digital officer of Lululemon and the chief digital officer of United Airlines, and meeting with the application teams that were actually building customer experiences on top of the infrastructure. I think those two things sort of like were a good melding of career experiences for me that really sets into Causely, which, in a way, Causely is connecting the dots from application to infrastructure and everything in between. And so I think it's probably that combination of factors. But yeah, back to your initial question, for me, it's always about the people. I mean, I think it's the people that you get to work with and the type of customer you get to serve is what drives you and gets you out of bed every morning.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the latest news of Causely integrating into Grafana. Can you walk us through this integration and how specifically it adds value to the engineering teams, without maybe adding complexity to their work?
Well, so the main news around Grafana is that we've actually listed now a data source in their marketplace, and so we also do have an integration with Alert Manager. So there's sort of two things here going on at once. On the Alert Manager side, which is the thing you asked about, yes, Causely customers have the ability to take Causely insights and route them into whatever alerting or chat ops system that they have, and then to the other piece on the data source side, we also published a signed plugin or data source with Grafana in their marketplace. And why that is so valuable to our joint customers is if you think about the typical Grafana customer and typical Causely customer, something that they have in common in terms of why they like both Grafana and us is the extensibility and the adaptability of both platforms. And so if you think about Causey's value proposition, which is really about taking more of a tops down oriented view on inferring the root causes that explain why latency or errors are propagating in an environment. Oftentimes, when an engineer is going deeper into the data, which they often want to do, we want to enable them to do that in their Grafana dashboards that they already know and love. And so that combination of being able to start with the root cause rather than to start by trying to chase the symptoms of a problem helps reduce the MTTR for an engineer and allows them to stay where they already work, which is inside of their Grafana dashboards.
Yeah, I would imagine that engineers, they are dealing with floods of alerts, and it's not always feasible or necessary to dig into each and every one of them. So how does Causely help them identify the critical ones that actually can have impact on the health of the system?
Yeah, so it's a great point you're making. When you think about a cloud native application, usually when something goes wrong, you don't have one alert, you have a flood of alerts. And so, like I described when I said that we take more of a top down oriented view, what you get when Causely notifies you about something is you get the root cause that explains a bunch of those alerts. And so, usually, if you were to look inside of one of our customers' Slack channels where they have a Causely notification, like you said, getting routed to them through Grafana's alert manager, what they get is the one root cause that has been inferred by our causal reasoning engine, and with that is the corresponding evidence that is associated to that one root cause. So usually that is a bunch of symptoms, each of which could be their own discrete alert that you no longer need to chase or troubleshoot or triage because Causely has inferred the one root cause that explains all of these alerts. And so it really stands in contrast to how a lot of people think about troubleshooting today, which is I get an alert. I start to figure out what's going on. Is this a real problem? What other alerts are associated to this problem? And what do I need to do about it? We describe that as more of the bottoms up motion of sort of collecting the data and then going figuring out what it means, as opposed to Causely's approach, which is more of this tops down, start with inferring the root cause and then provide the supporting evidence, which generally reduces the amount of noise and the number of alerts that you need to troubleshoot in the first place.
So did I get this right? Instead of showing engineers what is not working, the system is able to surface the why something is not working and actually proactively um, work on that. Is that the correct assumption?
Yeah, that's a good way to it's a good way to think about it is we get you to the why behind the what. Exactly.
So it's well known that making sure that your systems are up and running at all times without any delay is critically important to many businesses. So maybe you could share with us a real world example where this integration with Grafana helped some of the businesses dramatically decrease the time of incident response time or incident troubleshooting time.
Yeah, so a typical issue for a company could be consider a database that starts to be sluggish. Okay. Now, if a database starts to have performance issues, sometimes you're going to notice other latency pop up in an environment in other services. Now, if you think about a typical development team, those are multiple teams responsible for multiple services. They don't all come at the problem with their same domain expertise or their same point of reference on the problem. And so if you look inside of Causely, what you will get is, for example, the Causely has inferred that a root cause is with your database, and that root cause in the database is the reason why you're getting alerts in all of these different services. And so if you want to bring it to real life of what that means for a customer, uh, let's say you have an inventory management system. If all of a sudden your database is starting to lag, all of a sudden your inventory is not up to date. Well, shoppers are shopping online. Let's say you're a real money gaming betting app. If all of a sudden your database starts to lag, then all of a sudden the betting odds on an event aren't updating in real time. And that's great for the consumer who wants to bet on one side of the bet because now they can take advantage of the fact that the score of the game has changed, but they can get a favorable line. It's not so great for the betting site or the betting app that is trying to make sure that they draw equal interest on both sides of the bet. So I hope those couple of examples help.
Yeah, I've been doing some research and I could see that observability space is extremely crowded domain. There are lots of companies and they're offering new tools, new platforms to tackle every bit of the observability space. And my question to you is a bit provocative. What makes this challenge that you're dealing with unique enough that it would require a new company and a fresh look and a fresh approach from a company like yours?
Yeah, so here's one way I'll give you sort of a story I like to tell, and then I'll get more into the heart of the question. I always like to say that nobody likes to go to the bar that has nobody waiting outside to get in. You know, like you always want to go to the bar or the club or the restaurant that everybody wants to go to. So I think the fact that it is a crowded space tells you a couple things. It tells you that there are hard problems to solve in the space and that there are valuable problems to solve in the space. And if you think about why Causely, I'm sorry, maybe if I just clarify your question, is your question about why Causely or which problem needs to be solved?
Yeah. So my question is why Causely? Why other players like Datadog that is providing a holistic solution to the market, why they can't deal with this challenge or what part of it is missing in their offering that you are able to provide instantly and seamlessly to so many companies worldwide.
It comes down to a matter of approach and specialization. So if you think about a lot of these observability companies, they've all come from a perspective of I want to make it easy for engineers to get the data that they need in order to decide what to do about what's going on in the environment. It's very different than fundamentally building an analytics company or a system that is intended to automatically analyze the data for you, as opposed to giving data to humans to analyze. Right. So if you sort of think about the sort of difference of approach there, it, on the one hand, as humans, we all sort of feel like we are more in control when we have better visibility to what is going on. But having better visibility and having better dashboards and having better reports in and of itself doesn't actually give us better control over performance. And so I think it's just fundamentally about solving a different problem than what a lot of these observability companies seek to solve. And it's not to question the validity or the value of dashboards or alerting systems that are providing data for humans to go interpret what's happening and what I need to do about it. But I think the fact that we can go into any environment and show that our system reduces the amount of toil and reduces the amount of cognitive load that the engineering team has to go through, shows that we're solving a different problem. Sort of think of it as the difference between giving people tools to build their dashboards versus giving people a system that analyzes the data for them. That's sort of the simplest way to compare the two approaches.
Yeah, so when it comes to adoption, what kind of main challenges do you see on the market? And I know the company has been on the has been operating for around 2 years. Is that correct?
The company's been around for 2.5 years. We've really been in market for a few months, actually.
So, as a relatively new player in the market, what are the main misconceptions that are still there about observability that you can see, and how are you going to go about it?
Well, I think the biggest misunderstanding people have, and I think it just, again, it comes down to a matter of approach, is a lot of companies treat observability as a big data problem. They treat it as, hey, if I just have all the data just in case, then I will be able to do something useful with the data. And what I will do with the data, I'll figure out later. But the first thing is I need to collect all the data and make sure I have all the data. And I think that's just fundamentally the thing that's broken here or that needs to change, that we're trying to bring into the market, is to start with a system that has a declared intent, with that declared intent being, hey, I want to be able to, on my own, my system on its own, wants to be able to analyze the performance characteristics of the cloud native application and infer the root cause that explains why latency or errors are happening in the application for the purpose of controlling its performance. And if I start with that declared intent of a system, and then I go and I build an abstraction and a common data model that is intended to solve for that problem, I'm starting more tops down, and I'm building an analytics and also a method of collecting data that actually leads me to collect far less data than I would otherwise collect if I didn't know why I was collecting data in the first place. Which again kind of gets to like, how do people approach it? They approach it with, oh, I need a big data warehouse. And then they try to defend the decision by saying, oh, well, storage is getting cheaper. All this stuff's getting cheaper. So it's okay. Even though we all know that 60 something percent or 70 something percent of that data, no one's ever going to touch it. I'm going to give you a reaction for why I'm going to defend my decision to collect the data because I'm going to say all that stuff's getting cheaper. But it's not just the cost of storing the data, it's then also the people who now have to go figure out how to make sense of the data, how to go query the data, how to make sure that they're building the right dashboards and visualizations of the data. Again, all without that declared intent of what do I actually want out of my observability practice in the first place. And so I don't know if I'm completely answering your question, so I'm sorry if you need to re-ask it, but I think that's the real difference in approach here is instead of treating it like a big data problem and just making sure everyone has access to any data they might need, is to be a bit more opinionated and to take more of that tops down oriented view and saying, hey, I have this declared intent for my system, which is make sure the application can perform reliably. In order for the application to perform reliably, I need to be able to spot and eliminate signs of latency and errors in the system. And in order to do that, I need an abstraction and I need a certain type of data, certain types of data in order to go infer causality about latency and errors that propagate in the environment. You just end up with a fundamentally different uh, approach, different system, and also different unit economics for the actual solution versus some of these observability approaches that people are taking.
Yeah, changing the mindset of the companies can present itself as a major task. So how would you actually deal with it? Do you see there is a need for more education about the part where companies interpret their data? They need to interpret it differently. They don't have to go necessarily for storing and collecting all of the data, but just the most critical one. So what would be your approach here?
Well, I think part of the challenge and how we're meeting the challenge is to try to meet customers where they are in terms of how they operate today, and that is a bit about what this Grafana data source is all about, right? Rather than sure we have a UI and you can navigate our insights in our own UI if you'd like. But we're really not opinionated about that. And that's why we're trying to pump our insights into your Grafana dashboard so that if that's the place where you like to live and that's where you like to come in every day to see how systems are performing, we're not opinionated about you living in our UI, and we want to help you meet you where you work today, whether that be in Grafana or whether that be in Slack, whether that be in PagerDuty. We've really gone to lengths to make sure that our engine is extensible and that the insights from our engine can be pushed into any systems that you use today to manage the performance of your applications.
Well, given the complexity of the root cause analysis in these highly interconnected and intricate systems, do you foresee any challenges for Causely? And if so, what kind of proactive steps are you taking to address them?
So I mean, it's the inverse. It's that if you have an old monolith, I question how much value we really have to offer you. Uh, and so it's really more it's more that really this system is designed when you think about where do I really need something that can reason about cause and effect as it relates to applications. If everything is self-contained within one small VM and it's a very simple application and it doesn't do much, figuring out the root cause is I don't want to call it trivial, but I wouldn't say that's our problem to solve. Our problem at Causely to solve for customers is when you have lots of services communicating with each other and alerts start to propagate across the environment because all of a sudden, if one service is slow, that has a cascading effect on other services. Those are the places where it becomes really hard to figure out causality and to figure out the why behind all those alerts. And so it's actually the perfect storm for us, so to speak, is if a customer has lots of services communicating with each other that make up the application, as opposed to some monolithic old sort of simple app.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, you are very new to the domain, and I would be curious about your vision for the future. Let's say for the next 12 to 18 months, what is it that you are looking to achieve? Is this the new innovative product, or maybe building partnership, or making the significant impact on the existing observability market?
Yeah, so if you think about where we've started, it's been with cloud native applications, ideally running on top of Kubernetes, uh, and whether the company has open telemetry or not, that is a trend and a pattern where we find ourselves adding a lot of value. So that's a very specific ideal customer profile that I just drew for you, right? And so when you think about where do we want to go from there, there are a whole other set of applications. Sorry, there's a whole set of other places where we are applicable. Not to misuse the word applications because it could be confusing. Uh, there's a whole other set of places where we are applicable. And if you think about our value proposition, it is, or our unique value proposition is centered around this causal reasoning engine. And that causal reasoning engine uh, is is something that we can apply to causality problems that you are trying to solve in a number of different domains. We really chose to start with I have a cloud native application running on top of Kubernetes, and I either already have open telemetry or I'm going to use Causely's ability to automatically instrument open telemetry traces in that Kubernetes environment to reason about why I have latency and errors in the app. Again, it's a very specifically defined problem and ideal customer profile. But again, at the core, what we have is this causal reasoning engine or causal reasoning platform that we can apply to many other use cases. I don't want to go about naming them just yet, not to get ahead of myself. But that is the idea: is to think of uh, our causal reasoning platform for cloud native applications as our flagship product or our first sort of proof point of our causal reasoning engine in the market. And there will be more to come down the road.
Yeah, in every interview with every guest that we feature in the Prime U, we talk about artificial intelligence, and I wouldn't feel comfortable letting you go without asking, do you leverage AI at Causely to in any form to build the causal reasoning engine and to train your platform?
Yeah, so there's a lot to be said here, and in fact, we have a blog we just posted. I guess it was last week at this point, about this topic. So, a couple things to say. One is, I feel like nowadays a lot of people say AI, and it has almost become shorthand for Gen AI or for the use of LLMs. And so, it's important to just clarify that Causely does apply AI, but it is different than what a lot of people nowadays automatically assume when you think AI. Just to go a step further to explain it, we are in our causal reasoning engine applying the concept of a Bayesian network and another uh, concept that fits under the category of AI, which is around abductive inference. So those are two, our application of a Bayesian network and our application of abductive inference are two uh, topics that sit under the umbrella of AI. Those are unique to us in what we're doing. Now, having said that, most people, when they ask about AI these days, immediately go to Gen AI or LLMs or things like that. So we too are making our engine extensible with LLMs. And let me just explain how. So Causely on its own applies a Bayesian network and conducts a form of abductive inference to on its own infer the root cause of why you have a problem in your application, where the problem is. We can feed that understanding of the root cause of the problem to an LLM. And an LLM is actually very good once you've actually identified what the actual root cause is. An LLM is actually pretty good at reasoning about what you should do about the problem now that the problem has been properly identified. And so I think it's just worth sort of again contrasting this. You asked about AI and an observability. There is a lot of noise right now in the market on this topic. And what a lot of people are sort of skipping to is they've already assumed that they know where the problem is. And that is a massive assumption to make. And so if I just compare two approaches, so we've already established before that in a cloud native application, when you have a problem, you don't have one alert, you have a flood of alerts. Okay. So compare two approaches. One approach is I'm going to take each of those alerts and give it to an LLM, and I'm going to have the LLM try to reason about every single one of those alerts to figure out what's going on. Just think about the sheer amount of complexity and tokens and cost and effort that that takes. Now compare this approach. On the other hand, I have something like Causely. Causely is on its own actually inferring the root cause of where the problem is and what's really the explanation for why I have 50 or 100 alerts going on. And instead of feeding 50 or 100 different alerts to an LLM to try to go reason about, all I'm feeding to the LLM is the one inferred root cause that Causely has identified. And I'm asking the LLM to now take it from there to figure out what do I go do about this problem. The second approach I just described to you is a whole lot more productive, efficient, probably cost effective. So there's a lot to be said about that type of approach. And again, like I said, we could probably do a whole hour just on this topic. And we wrote a whole blog about this just last week that you can find on causely.ai.
Interesting, because while you were speaking, I understood that I completely misunderstood how you train and how you approach causal reasoning. Because I initially thought that leveraging LLMs and AI was the central to your solution. But if it's not, maybe you could explain how specifically do you train your engine to recognize multiple challenges and issues that can arise in the systems, right? And prioritize the most important and critical ones. So what is the key to making your system work?
Yes, so there's a few things here. So one is that we start with a knowledge base, and that knowledge base generically describes specific root causes that can explain why latency and errors happen in a cloud native application. Okay. Now, that knowledge base, we continue to make that knowledge base more robust all the time. We list all those root causes in our docs on our website. So there's no like black box of magic. It's a very specific set of root causes that have been defined in our knowledge base. Now, like I said, that knowledge base is generic. What makes it specific to your environment is when you deploy us in your environment, we take open telemetry metrics and traces. And if you don't already have open telemetry deployed, like I said, we can auto instrument open telemetry metrics and traces for you. Or if you have, you mentioned Datadog earlier, if you have Datadog as a data source or any other legacy APM, those are fine data sources as well. So as soon as you point those data sources into Causely, Causely takes that generic knowledge base and then marries that with your topology. And so Causely on its own automatically builds out a topology of all of your service dependencies, what's talking to what does sort of the environment look like? And then it is applying that knowledge base with that discovered topology to create a causality graph. And that causality graph is again specific to your environment at that given point in time. So if something changes about your environment, all of a sudden there's a new architecture change, there's a new service dependency that's created, or something else changes about your environment, that causality graph updates in real time. And so it's with that causality graph that Causely generates that the system infers the root causes that could occur, right? So even before anything happens, it identifies what could go wrong and with which probability would each symptom in the environment actually explain a root cause that occurred. And then also it tells you actively, hey, what's actually going wrong if anything is going wrong right now? Are there any anomalies in the environment? So obviously it's both capturing for you what could go wrong and what actually is going wrong inside of what I described before. How we do it is by building and applying that Bayesian network and by doing this sort of abductive inference. Again, I'm skipping some details, but they're all talked about on the website, on our product page. We think that it's important that we don't try to make Causely feel like a black box because it's not. I think if something feels like a black box and feels too good to be true, there's probably somewhere you're being misled. And so we try to be very explicit on our website and in our docs. And anybody that reaches out, we're always happy to spend as much time as they want to explain how the math works, because at the end of the day, this is math and it's a probabilistic approach, which we think is the right approach to infer root causes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But at this point, I'd like to shift our gears a little bit and talk about the company culture. We all know that it's impossible to build innovative product without forward-thinking people. So, what type of people you're looking to bring to your organization to be able to foster the innovation culture, and how difficult it is to find the right people?
So there's a couple key values. Before I get into that, just to give you a little bit of background about the team itself, because like I said at the start, when you asked about, hey, why did you want to come to Causely? The team was the big draw for me, you know? And so if you look at some of our engineers, they've been solving complex problems with distributed systems since the 1990s. And you can go back to a company called Smarts that EMC acquired, and these are engineers that were part of that company. These are the engineers that built Turbonomic, which IBM acquired for $2 billion. It's a great engineering team, mostly based right here in the US. And the team that you asked about the values, the way that I think about our company values, whether it's for our engineers or for really any role, is about three things. So the first is about psychological safety, and I don't know if you're familiar, but there was a big study done about high performing teams, and the most common attribute about high performing teams is they share a feeling of psychological safety. And psychological safety has a bunch of other sort of sub bullets and details behind it, but just for the sake of the interview, I'll try to keep it short.
No, actually, I would really appreciate if you could unpack that a little bit more for us. I believe many of our listeners would really benefit from you sharing this kind of approach.
Let's do it. Sure. So when you think about psychological safety, there's a few tenets to that. So the first is to feel like you are able to genuinely be yourself. Okay. which kind of sounds weird, but I feel like whenever you bring somebody into a team, there's the reality that they are the new organ to the body, and the body can reject the new organ if the new organ doesn't figure out how to fit in. But in part of fitting in, you also, as a new joiner, want to be able to stand out. And you only feel that sense of safety if you feel like you're in a culture where you're sort of encouraged to be you. Okay. So that is one piece about psychological safety. Another key piece around psychological safety is feeling like you are safe to admit what you don't know and to be learning, always be learning. Okay. Uh, a third part around psychological safety is feeling like you're in a role where you understand what's the magical attribute that you're being expected to bring to the team, and you feel like you're playing a role where you're able to bring that secret ingredient, that little bit of pixie dust into the team, right? There's somebody who's been a mentor for me used to say that startups are all about, hey, how much talent density can you bring into the first 20 hires that you make? And in those first 20 hires, you need s- each of those people has to be very spiky at one skill that complements everybody else. And I think that, it was advice given to me about startups, but I think that could be true about any new team that you build. Any team, when you're getting to that first 20 people, that sort of makes or breaks the culture and the DNA of it. So having that is a part of psychological safety. And then I think the last part of psychological safety that's important is being able to be intellectually honest and just call it like it is, call out the problems, to disagree openly, but in a productive way. And I think all those are attributes of psychological safety. So that's one of the key attributes. The second is around having a growth mindset. And a growth mindset, in some ways, is you could sort of compare it as like, are you a know-it-all or are you a learn-it-all? And I try to, in everything I do, try to demonstrate that I never feel like I know it all and that there's always the next thing to learn. And so that's the second attribute that I look for. So the first one is around psychological safety. The second one is about growth mindset and feeling like you can make incremental gains to always get better at your craft. And then the third is around having a strong internal locus of control. And if you compare, for those that don't know what that means, so an external locus of control means that I feel like life happens to me. Like life is something that happens to me, versus an internal locus of control is I feel like what happens is because of what I do to life or what the impact I make. And so I talk pretty openly about those things. Again, they're listed on our company page around our company values. And uh, they're hard things to interview somebody for when you ask about who do I try to bring onto the team. It's really hard to interview for those things. And the best thing that I found is I try to just talk about those things explicitly and make it really easy for somebody to self select out if they feel like that doesn't represent what they're all about. And so that's hopefully a decent answer for your question.
Well, honestly, what you have just described focuses more on the company itself. I'm sorry. And if I were applying, I would be looking for those values you mentioned to determine if the company is the right fit for me. But if you reverse the process, when considering whether I am the right fit for the company, how can I assess whether I have the internal locus of control or external locus of control? What is your take on that?
It's a hard one because there's a balance there too. Like you also don't want the person who has such an inflated ego where internal locus of control can be too extreme too, right? So I mean I think to me it's really about how does somebody talk about their accomplishments and the challenges that they faced in their career. And you try to find that healthy balance between they take accountability and responsibility for their actions and their outcomes, but they also share generously about who helped them to get there. I think that's sort of what you're looking for. But you and I can have a whole other discussion about interviewing because I also feel like, I almost started a company in that domain because I think all of us humans have an inflated sense that we are really good at interviewing and selecting talent. And we're all so much worse at it than we think we are. And so I actually think it's a good problem for software to solve, but that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Many hiring managers might feel threatened by this type of technology.
I will not be surprised if that company will come along at some point. That I think the way we select talent is very, very biased and fraught with errors, and I think it's ripe for disruption. Maybe that's the next company after Causely.
Well, that's a great note to end on. I appreciate your time, and sharing your thoughts and your vision for Causely and observability space in general. I really hope to have you back at the Prime Use sometime soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.